All right, welcome everyone. If you're gearing up for the UPSC exams, you know that the non-cooperation movement is a huge deal. I mean, it's an absolute cornerstone of modern Indian history. So today, we're going to break it all down. What caused it, how it unfolded, and what its legacy really is. Let's dive right in. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about why it was such a turning point. Then, we'll get into the causes. Why did it even happen? After that, the plan itself, how it spread across India, why it was called off, and finally, what it all left behind. A really solid framework for your prep. So let's start with part one, a turning point for India. This is really about the dawn of a new era in mass politics. And let's be super clear on this from the get-go. The non-cooperation movement, or NCM, wasn't just another protest. No way. This was a complete game changer. It's the moment the freedom struggle went from being something discussed by elites to a full-blown national movement. And this is the key takeaway right here. It was the first nationwide Gandhian mass movement. I mean, think about it. Gandhi had already had these incredible successes, right, in places like Champaran, Khera, and Ahmedabad, but those were localized. The NCM, this was the first time that his ideas of satyagraha were rolled out on a massive all-India scale. A huge shift. Okay, moving on to section 2. Why did it happen? What was this perfect storm of grievances? A movement this big doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a whole bunch of things coming together right around 1920. Economic problems, political promises being broken, and some really harsh laws that just push people to the edge. So let's look at the specific catalysts. You had serious economic hardship after World War I. Think inflation, crazy taxes. Then there was this feeling of political betrayal. India had supported Britain in the war and got very little in return. The so-called reforms were a huge disappointment. And then, bam, you get these explosive triggers. The repressive Rowlatt Act, the absolute tragedy of the Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, and on top of all that, the Khilafat movement. It's this mix of long-simmering anger and immediate shocks that really lit the fuse. Let's zoom in on the Rowlatt Act for a second. This thing was just draconian. It basically said the British could arrest and lock up any Indian they wanted without a trial. Can you imagine? It was a total attack on the most basic human rights, and people were furious. For many, and especially for Gandhi, this was the final straw that led him to call for a nationwide satyagraha. And then there was the Khilafat movement. This is where you can really see Gandhi's strategic mind at work. See, Indian Muslims were protesting the British treatment of the Ottoman Caliphate after the war. It was a huge issue for them. Gandhi saw this as a golden opportunity, a chance to bring Hindus and Muslims together for a common cause. And it worked. He managed to create this incredible, unprecedented unity, which made the whole movement so much more powerful. So look at how quickly all of this happened. In 1919, you have the Rowlatt Act and Jallianwala Bagh. By September 1920, Congress is giving the non-cooperation plan the green light in Calcutta, and by December, in Nagpur, it's officially adopted. Then boom, 1920 to 21, the NCM and Khilafat movements just merge and take off. The pace is just staggering, from outrage to a full-blown, organized movement in just over a year. Which brings us to Section 3, the plan for non-cooperation. So what was the actual blueprint? You've got all this energy and anger. How do you channel it into a non-violent revolution? Let's get into the nuts and bolts of the plan. Now, this wasn't about just sending everyone into the streets at once. Gandhi had a very clear phased approach. Step 1 was symbolic. Give back your British titles. Boycott government schools, courts, and jobs. Step 2 was more economic. Promote Swadeshi, Indian-made goods, and boycott foreign stuff. And only then, if needed, would they move to Step 3, mass civil disobedience, like refusing to pay taxes. It was all about building discipline and momentum step by step. And this table gives you a great snapshot of that boycott program. The thinking was brilliant, really. The British couldn't run India without Indian cooperation, so the plan was to just withdraw that cooperation everywhere. Lawyers boycott the courts, students boycott the schools, everyone boycotts foreign goods. The goal was to bring the whole British system to a grinding halt by simply refusing to participate. But here's a point that is so important to remember. It wasn't just about boycotting. That was only half the story. The other half was the constructive program. While they were tearing down the British system, they were also building up an Indian one. Promoting Swadeshi with the Charkha and Kadi, setting up their own national schools and courts, working on Hindu-Muslim unity, and even tackling social issues like untouchability. It was about building a self-reliant India from the ground up. All right, on to Section 4. The movement spreads across India. This is where we see how this national idea was translated into regional action. Because the real strength of the NCM was that it wasn't just a Delhi or Calcutta thing, it was happening everywhere. And this table is just perfect for showing the movement's incredible diversity. Look at this. In the United Provinces, you had present movements. In Punjab, the Akali movement for Gurudwara reform got swept up in it. In Andhra, people refused to pay taxes. In Assam, there were strikes on tea plantations. Each region took the central idea of non-cooperation and applied it to their own local fights, their own local grievances. That's what made it a true all-India uprising.
Okay, Section 5. This is the big question, isn't it? Why was it withdrawn? I mean, things were really heating up. The movement had massive momentum. The British were worried. So why on earth was it suddenly called off? Let's dig into the Chauri Chaura incident and everything that followed.
So everyone knows about the Chauri Chaura incident, where protesters tragically killed several policemen. That was the immediate trigger for sure. But it's not the whole story. Gandhi felt the movement was losing its nonviolent discipline, which to him was everything. Plus, the Khilafat issue was kind of fizzling out. The government was cracking down hard, arresting leaders left and right. And some in Congress were getting worried that it was turning into a radical anti-landlord movement. So Chauri Chaura was the spark, but there were deeper reasons for pulling the plug. So that leads us to our final section, the NCM's enduring legacy. So was it a failure? I mean, it didn't achieve its stated goal of Swaraj in a year, but the answer is a lot more complicated than that. It's definitely not a simple yes or no. We really have to look at a balance sheet of its successes and failures. Let's start with the successes because they were huge. First, the sheer scale of mass mobilization was something India had never seen before. Peasants, workers, students, women, everyone was involved. It became a true all-India movement reaching every corner of the country. It basically created this powerful anti-British feeling everywhere and achieved an incredible level of Hindu-Muslim unity, even if it was temporary. And of course, it set the stage for everything that came later, like the civil disobedience and Quit India movements. But for a really solid analysis, you have to look at the other side of the coin too. What were the limitations? Well, its reach into some really remote rural areas was limited. Tying the movement so closely to the religious Khilafat issue, well, that had some complicated consequences down the line. Not all the leaders were on the same page about strategy, and of course, ending it so abruptly left a lot of people feeling demoralized and confused. So, when you weigh it all up, what's the verdict? Yeah, it didn't achieve Swaraj in a year. That's the failure column. But look at the success column. It created a true mass movement, built a national consciousness, and forged unity. You could say its biggest success wasn't in achieving its immediate goal, but in its real goal, awakening the Indian people and getting them ready for the long fight ahead. It was like a training camp for the entire nation. Which leaves us with this one final, really big question that historians are still arguing about. Was calling it off a Himalayan blunder, as some said at the time, or was it a strategic masterstroke? Did Gandhi save the moral high ground of the movement by insisting on nonviolence, or did he stop a revolution right when it was about to succeed? That's something for you to think about as you put all this together. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.